advocate. I'm the chair of the council, and we'll go around the table here in the room, and also folks in the back, and then we'll go to folks on the phone.
Okay, I'm Stephanie Clark. I'm representing the Secretary of State's office.
I'm Erica Dyer. I'll be taking the minutes.
Scott Winkles with the League of Oregon Cities.
Andrew Schaefer, Secretary of State's office.
I'm Emily Madisar, the Government Accountability Attorney for Governor Kate Brown.
Todd Albert, the Deputy Public Records Advocate. Cameron Miles, Legislative Counsel.
All right, great. Folks on the phone.
Kim Thatcher.
Oh, sorry. Senator Thatcher, I think I heard you.
Yes, it's hard to know when to jump in. Yeah, it's me. I'll go back on mute.
Okay, great. Next.
Tony Hernandez.
Tony Hernandez.
Sharon Khosravi,
Okay,
SJU Local 503.
Okay. Anyone else on the phone line?
Hi, Ginger.
Liz Craig, okay.
Yeah, hi.
And I think we had one more person.
Rob Bovette from AOC.
Hi, Rob. All right, any other folks on the phone line? Okay, I think we then have enough for a quorum. Good, all right, great, we can have our meeting. So, introductions. I have sent around some minutes for folks to look over. I was hoping to go ahead and get those approved today because we do have a little bit of a backlog on that. I know that folks had asked for some edits to one of the minutes before. I did make those edits. So I think I will go ahead and see if we can get those minutes passed. Do we want to do it? I guess we'll do it minute by minute. So for the first set of minutes, we have, what's the date on the first set? So I guess let's just see, does anyone have any objections to any of the minutes?
No.
Okay, it sounds like we're good on the minutes. So does someone want to just move, we can approve the minutes and then we can kind of move on with the meeting?
I move to approve all past minutes.
Second.
All right.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Okay.
All opposed? All right, great. So the minutes are approved. And the next item on the agenda is the update from the Public Records Advocate. So I distributed here in the room, and I will also send around for folks to look at a spreadsheet with our requests for assistance. We are up to about 213 requests for assistance, I believe, at this point. We're receiving new requests for assistance pretty much every day. We continue to resolve those mostly with sort of informal mediation and facilitated communication. I will send those around for folks on the phone to look at, but the issues remain about the same. There are a lot of disputes over fees. A lot of the calls that we get have to do with delays or what people feel are improper denials. But we've also received an increasing number of calls and emails from folks on the government side who just have sort of general questions about public records law or want someone to take a look at their public records policy, which I think is a really good step forward. A lot of those calls and emails are being sent in by people who participated in our trainings, and they're taking us up on the offer to provide them with further assistance. So I think that that's a really good sign. Some of them are more time-consuming than others. Some of them are pretty quick, easy answer. Others require, several hours of research before we can give them an answer. But I do think it's a good sign that we're hearing more from folks on the government side. I will say anecdotally that we're hearing a lot from localities who are asking us questions about public records law. I think probably in part because they're attending a lot of our trainings that we're doing in conjunction with the folks here at the archives. So again, I think that is a pretty good sign. And as I said before, we're up to about 213 requests for assistance. As far as training goes, in April to June, we participated in a lot of training. I did a training at Portland State University, one at the ACLU in Portland, trainings in Medford and Klamath Falls. I did a training at the Oregon Law Enforcement Records Officer Association, a training at Linfield College in McMinnville, a training at Oregon DHS. I also did one or two panels at the National Freedom of Information Coalition event, and I participated in the Oregon Bar event. We have some upcoming training scheduled. Tomorrow I'll be in Eugene at Lane County giving a training. On Friday I'm going to be participating in the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association conference. The week following that I will be in DC doing several trainings at the American Society of Access Professionals. In August, I have a training at the University of Oregon, training scheduled in Bend and Sisters, a training in Junction City, which is actually a sold-out training, thanks in part to some of our folks here on the council who distributed it to their members. The first training was fully filled, and so we had to schedule a second training because it's that popular. Free public records training, apparently people are signing up for it. I'll be doing a training at Department of Corrections in September, and then I will be appearing and giving training at the Public Law Conference in conjunction with Stephanie and several other folks here from the archives. So we have a pretty full roster of trainings coming up, but I would love it if folks would, publicize the availability of training so we could get even more on the calendar, especially folks working with localities. That would be great. And I'm hoping to also extend the offer again to the Records Association, or Recorders Association. So I think it would be helpful to just get the word out and let people know that we can come to them and give them training. I've also received, you'll see on the request for assistance spreadsheet, that recently I've received several requests for people who are just curious about whether or not we have any videotaped training. So I've been linking them to the videotape trainings that we do have on our website, and they seem to have found that helpful. I'm hoping to update those sometime in the near future in light of the changes in the law that happened this session, so I can add new information to those trainings. Does anyone have any questions? Thoughts, comments?
Any particular themes you see as far as questions and interest from people?
Well, so a lot of questions about exemptions still, a lot of questions and issues related to fees. I suspect that part of the reason why I'm hearing a lot about fees is that there isn't really an obvious appeal avenue for fee reasonableness. The appeal avenues are for denials of fee waivers or fee reductions. So if people have an issue with the number of hours, for instance, that a government body is quoting to them, or the hourly rate, there aren't a lot of other places they can go. So I do hear about that a lot. A lot of the requests for assistance that I receive about exemptions are just, an agency has applied this exemption to these documents. Does that seem like that might be accurate? Like, is it fair for them to apply this exemption? Or, what is this exemption that they have applied? And so then I'll just give more information about the exemption. So those are the general themes that I'm seeing. And a lot of it, honestly, it seems like it's a failure of communication. Requesters get frustrated with delays. Perhaps public bodies aren't the best always at communicating updates to the requester. And so, a lot of what we're doing is just sort of cutting through that red tape.
Thank you.
All right. And I would like to say, as it says on the top of our agenda, we do accept public comment throughout the meeting. So if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to just step up to the table and participate. I tend to find that that's a more meaningful method of participation. So we have a few minutes. We have some financial experts and budget experts from DAS who've come to talk to us today, but I think
Kate's not here.
Kate's not here yet. Okay, great. So, do you want to just introduce yourself for folks on the phone?
Me? Yes.
Yeah, Lee Vandervoo just got here. So we'll wait a couple minutes because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is a happy thing. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they want to ask on any of the agenda items so far?
No, I just, I missed the introduction, but for the record, Steve Sewell from the Oregonian and the SPJ. And I also, hope it's okay, I was going to introduce another guest, Catherine Darnell Helms, the new Chief Data Officer for the state of Oregon.
It should be a fly on the wall. So I will skip ahead and just give the legislation update, and we can talk a little bit more about legislation later after we talk about the budget issues. So legislation update, obviously, as you all know, we did get the bill passed to get rid of the sunset on the council, on the Public Records Advisory Council. So the council is now a permanent body, which I think is really exciting. And we do have refreshments to celebrate that, if anyone wants any. Unfortunately, the other piece of legislation that we had proposed did not go through. It got kind of hung up in Ways and Means. There was a fiscal that was assessed on it from DHS, and then the fiscal was later removed. However, that was not communicated to me, which is a little bit frustrating. But the fiscal was removed, but it was a little bit too late in the session for us to be able to do anything. I think I found out about the fiscal being removed that Thursday, and then the Republicans left the state the next day. So most bills at that point were not going anywhere. So unfortunately, the annual reporting bill did not go through this time. But I'm hoping that we can reintroduce it next time and maybe have a little bit more traction. I've heard that there are discussions in state government about perhaps obtaining a tool for state government agencies to be able to track requests. So I think that that would probably make it less onerous for them to then comply with the annual reporting requirements. So hopefully in a couple of years, the landscape will have changed on that. But we may want to formulate a strategy for what we want to do about that piece of legislation, if we want to move it forward again, or if we want to focus on other things in the future. But we did thankfully get the council bill passed to renew the council, so it will be here indefinitely. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that, it does create staggered terms. There is a question in looking at that about, for the news media representatives, who has what staggered term, but we'll have to kind of sort that out amongst ourselves in the future. So we can talk it out, I think, at the next meeting once people have had a chance to look at that legislation.
When do when do the local government terms, are they staggered as well?
I think they are staggered, but I'll have to take a look at the legislation. So that would be a good thing for us to add to the next agenda. And the other thing that we sort of need to sort out is we need to figure out what vehicle we're hoping to use to get bills introduced in the future. The timing before it had been introduced by the Secretary of State's office, I think they vetted our legislative concepts, but it turns out that that was probably not the correct procedural method for us to take. We have the option of submitting things along with the rest of the legislative concepts that get submitted to the governor's office, but then the timetable is pretty soon, actually, even for the next biennium. So the other option that we have is we do have two members of the legislature on the council. If they're amenable to it, they could submit the bills themselves and sponsor those bills. So we'll have to kind of strategize for how we want to do that, given the timeline. Do folks have thoughts on that?
I do. This is Scott Wickle. I think if we're a state agency, then I think it would behoove us to participate within the governor's, submit them with the governor's bills. What are the timelines for when will we need to get concept drafts into that hopper?
I think it would be next April. Yeah, I think it's next April that we would need to have something submitted. So.
I'm not a big fan of moving anything in short session unless it is truly a technical fix.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we would be introducing in the short session. But for something for the long session, I think we would need to get it submitted, have it ready to go and submit by next April.
If we do that process and we submit by April, then the issues that we had with the fiscal on the second bill could be resolved sooner. If they were part of the governor's, it was part of the governor's package.
I'm not sure how that would work. Emily, do you have a sense of how that works?
I'm far from a legislative expert,
Okay.
but Scott's been here many more sessions than I have, and I trust that.
Yeah, I mean, that could be.
Well, are you saying that DAF reviews every legislative proposal that might go forth from the governor's office for fiscal?
I'm not exactly certain how they do it within the office, but I think if it was coordinated to the governor's legislative director, then it was part of the governor's agenda, then issues with the other agencies may be resolved. Right. Yeah, sooner. Regardless of cost. I mean, the governor can post, can proof whatever she wants in her package. Right.
Do others have thoughts on this comment?
Are any of the legislative members on the phone?
Senator Thatcher is. Anyone on the phone have comments or thoughts?
I'm happy to sponsor, but I think it would be good for a long session, especially to see if you can get in on the governor's list of bills. I know for the short session, I'm also not wild about moving anything that's not technical or just emergent. And I think the governor's limited to 5 bills during the short session besides, and individual members like senators we're limited to 1. House representatives, they each get 2, which is kind of backwards to me, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything we'll have for the short session. So the question will be what we want to come up with, what we can come up with between now and April for the long session. So we'll plan to hopefully have, if we want to have legislative concepts for the next long session, we'll need to have them ready by next April end. So we'll probably have an October meeting, a December meeting, and then maybe a March or April meeting to get those in.
And also potentially subcommittee.
Yes, and hopefully subcommittee meetings in the meantime. So, but we'll need to hustle a little bit.
That sounds doable to me. I mean,
Okay.
and I suppose there's always a fallback if April doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, if we can't get things together, then we'll need to look at other options. Because this time, the issue was that by the time that the council was formed, I mean, we had our first meeting after I got here in May. So we're not going to make the cutoff for that other process. So we'll need to make sure we have our legislative concepts in before April. So almost at 1:25. So I invited some folks, and they have graciously agreed to come and take a few minutes explaining to us some of the budget processes at DAF to give us a better picture of how things work there. I don't think we yet have the final numbers on our budget, so they can't answer questions that we would have about the final numbers and about how that is exactly going to look. But what they can tell us about is more of what I don't necessarily know about, which is how the budgeting situation works at DAF. Generally, what will happen with our budget this biennium, as in where it's going to be within DAF. So I would like to invite to the table our DAF experts.
Thank you.
And I think that they're going to talk a little bit, and then they have a few minutes for questions, but I would ask that everyone be respectful of their time because this is a very busy season for them, and I'm very grateful that they could be here. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourselves for folks on the phone.
Thank you. I'm Brian DeForest. I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the state of Oregon. Been with the state for now 28 years. Most of that experience is inside of the state budget process itself.
And I'm Kate Nass. I'm the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the state. I've been with the state for about 15 years, but I've been in the budget process for about 10. So most of my work has been kind of more specific on health and human services stuff, but now I'm moving more into the all of state programs, so just generally budget process and the whole state budget. So, do you want me to just start? Okay, so we didn't prepare like a full-blown PowerPoint or anything. Basically, we just wanted to give a quick kind of highlight of the process, and it is a long process. I think sometimes that's it's a nuance that we all appreciate when we live and breathe the budget development process, but not everyone does. So the legislature for the 2019 legislative session just passed the 2019-21 budget. I think it's important to note that we actually started in our budget shop, started developing that budget. I think the first part of work comes a little bit before the February session, so we started in about January, February of 2018 to start hitting our projections to understand what it would cost for the 2019-21 budget. So it's a long process that all state agencies participate in, including DAS. So basically an agency request budget is due at the end of summer before going into a long session. So in August of 2018 was when agencies requested budgets, and that included basically what we currently do and any additional programs or changes we want to change to it. So kind of more, for example, the public record or the public advisory committee and the staff, they had a budget that was specific to the 1921 budget that was budgeted one way, and then part of the request was to move forward into the next biennium. Ultimately, the governor takes a look at that budget, the budgets that the agency requests, each agency, everything across the state, and makes a recommendation. Her budget this year was due on December 1, so that came out in preparation for the 2019 budget, and then the legislative body picks it up and adopts the legislatively adopted budget by the end of 2019. What also happens going into the interim is agencies' budgets can change. So there's a number of different periods where they got budget process or budget interim budget challenges or savings or other things. Typically that happens in like upcoming into the 2020 session, and then emergency boards can change an agency's budget at each individual point. They have different authorities. I don't want to kind of get into the nuance of that, but there is ultimately other opportunities that agencies' budgets change through the interim once the budget has been adopted by the legislature. When we do budget, we look at every fund type. We look at general fund, which is what we all consider our personal income taxes, corporate income tax. We also have other funds, which can be anything from gas tax, tobacco tax. It can also be fees, licenses, so license to be a real estate broker or license to hunt or fish. That's all considered other funds. And we also have federal funds, which is mostly money that's from the feds, either in a grant form or some sort of medical, like the Medicaid program, so Medicaid participation rate. And then lastly, we have lottery funds, which is our lottery fund allocation. Is how we have dedicated lottery funds and we have discretionary lottery funds. So we look at all of those when we're looking at the budget. DAS, I just want to kind of note from a Department of Administrative Services standpoint, most of our services are other funds in an assessment out to state agencies. So basically agencies pay Department of Administrative Services for the services that we provide for them, whether it's to administer a fleet of cars for them to use in the motor pool, whether it's to do IT oversight of their projects. You know, there's just a myriad of different reasons that they pay into the Department of Administrative Services, other funds assessment, or fee-for-service kind of basis. The last thing that I wanted to say at a high level is budgets are set by the legislature and by an appropriation. So basically the legislature sets a not to exceed appropriation. So for this particular program that the legislature has defined in the budget bill, there is a not to exceed this amount of money of expenditures. So they set a not to exceed expenditure limit. So basically then the agency has to not exceed that, and they can't. Our accounting systems are set in a way that you can't do that. It's not allowed to make a payment over the amount that's appropriated. But so we are constantly working with agencies on how they're spending their money and whatnot. That's kind of beside the point. I think the more pertinent point is that the agencies, so in this case, the public records advocate and her office, is part of the Department of Administrative Services budget. And with the transition of moving from a budget all on its own to being part of the Department of Administrative Services, it becomes a different appropriation or bucket. So it used to be on its own, which had to be balanced to the penny, and now it's kind of part of a broader chief operating office, and I think Brian can speak to that.
Thanks, Kate. So the Public Records Advocate's Office resides within the Chief Operating Office of the Department of Admin Services. DAS overall has a budget that exceeds $1 billion, but that covers our asset management, the fleet, the facilities, this building that we're in right now is an example of that. It includes our goods and services, where our procurement shop and our risk management resides, along with some accounting services and so on. So there's the bulk of the goods and services that we provide. We have a chief finance office, which is the office that Kate is from. It's a small other funded office. We have the chief human resource office, and then the chief operating office itself. And those 5 big divisions, if you will, have their own appropriations or limitations that they operate with. You are part, or this office is part of that chief operating office, which also includes the chief operating officer, Katie Cola, her staff. I'm part of that office, the Office of Economic Analysis, CASA, so the Children's Advocate, Special Advocates, court-appointed special advocates is part of that as well, along with a few other miscellaneous items. That limitation is established at that division level, and y'all are part of that. And we will get you final numbers, and on a regular basis, I think it's a monthly basis, Ginger will come over and we will give a report on how much was spent in the prior fiscal month and how much do we project to go for the remainder of the biennium. So there are both advantages and disadvantages of that. Last biennium, y'all operated under a very discrete general fund appropriation that was yours and yours alone. Nobody else had the legal authority to spend those dollars. So that a disadvantage is you're giving up that is that hard fence around. The advantage is now you're part of a much larger limitation that can move and ebb and flow with the priorities of the agency. So if y'all are not fully funded for training, and yet there is a training event or a conference that you really do need to attend that advances the priorities of the state of Oregon, DAS has a limitation in order to provide that. So that would become available as its weight against all other things. Yes?
So that transition occurred because the legislation only spoke to funding for the first biennium, and then we're moving into a new biennium, is that?
So each biennium, the budget has to be reapproved. Last biennium, it was granted a general fund appropriation. We brought in, or came into, and that appropriation was granted with the intent that the office become other funded at a future time. So at the agency request budget and into the governor's budget, we brought it in as an other funded agency or as an other funded unit. The governor's budget actually wanted to shift it back over to general fund, and the legislature made the distinct decision to not do that. So they approved the continued existence of the office with an other fund limitation. So now that we've talked about limitation, let's talk about the funding itself. General fund is an easy concept to get your head around. It's primarily personal income tax and is generally used for the greater good, or when there's not a single receiver of those kinds of services. So general fund was appropriate last biennium. The legislative body has decided to use the assessment of the chief operating office. And what we do in the COO is we look at the landscape of the agencies that are budgeted in the state, and we allocate a charge to those agencies based on a combination of the size of their budget and the number of FTE that they employ. So we assess them to cover all of our expenditures within COO. We assess them based on their relative size compared to other agencies. So in a sense, it's a tax on the agency, if you will. It's really just an assessment. The thought behind that is that you'll probably get more questions from regarding ODOT and DHS and OHA. Those are among the largest of the agencies, relative to the Board of Accountancy or the Board of Tax Service Examiners, who pay a very, very minimal amount of assessment. So we try to spread the wealth around. So the legislature has gone home, thank goodness. That was a wild ride. And they left us with what's called the legislatively adopted budget. That's the budget as they leave town for the first time. We will have 6 months of interim. There will be some activities in the Ways and Means Committees, the interim Ways and Means Committee, but the legislature itself will not take any official action until next February during the short session. All agencies that have a budget will have their budget adjusted in that February session. Agencies right now are not fully funded for their personal services. We didn't know what the collective bargaining agreements, we still don't know what the collective bargaining agreements will look like. Coming out of negotiations, the governor will also decide what compensation changes there will be for unrepresented and management positions. Those amounts are to be determined. The legislature sets aside a pot of money called the salary pot and distributes that amongst agencies once those unknowns become null. So at some point, we will update Ginger with, here's where your budget has moved on a go-forward basis. And then we'll go through that in February. Long about February, we will, is it February?
We're starting the adjustment.
Yeah, probably January of next year, so just a few 7 months away. DAS will begin discussing what do our assessments look like for the 21-23 biennium. We have to essentially know what are our budget asks going to look like so that we can develop what that assessment will look like. So if we decide to resurrect the package that was denied by the Legislative Fiscal Office, we would need to know some of that information as early as January. That allows us to build the largest possible request, and then we whittle down from there. Between January and April, we will determine what those assessments are, distribute that information out to agencies. We will finalize what our requests are going to look like, submit those requests no later than September 1st. We submit those to Kate's shop up in Budget Management Division. The governor then decides by December 1st what her budget's going to look like. It can go up, it can go down. Very rarely does it go up for any unknown reason, but certainly those things can come down. So for instance, my shops asked for 25 different packages. 12 ultimately made it to the governor's recommended budget. That modifies our assessment out to the agencies. Then we go into the following February into another longer session and come out the other end with the 21-23 legislatively adopted budget. It is a very long process. It is a marathon, not a sprint. But what we hope to come out with is the amount necessary to fund the goals and objectives and mission of offices like yours.
One thing I would just add to that, it is kind of difficult for those programs that are assessment-based. They essentially have to figure things out a little sooner. And a couple of months is a big amount of time when you're talking about, well, other agencies aren't having to finalize their budget requests until, July or August. Why am I having to figure this out so early? And it's all based on the fact that we at DAS and Brian's shop need to figure out how much revenue they need in order to have all those requests funded, because you can't necessarily walk that back as easy as it is. You can't add to it as easy as you can walk it back. Put it that way. I flip that around. So that is one nuance, that being part of the chief operating office budget as opposed to a general fund budget does kind of move it, significantly moves your timeframes with kind of finalizing your request.
So by January, 7 months from now, I have to determine how much replacement of the payroll system is going to cost, so that I can assess the state agencies. Let's just say for kicks and grins, it's $8 million. They in turn have to take that information that they are going to be charged $8 million and turn around and determine what does the new fishing license fee look like. So they have to determine their charges as they go out to their customers and so on. So that's why we developed it so far in advance. We have plenty of time for questions. We're both very accustomed to getting questions on when it comes to the state budget process.
I have a question. This is Lee for the folks on the phone. I don't think that the Ethics Commission in the state of Oregon is separately funded, or the Office of Government Ethics separately funded, but I know in some states it is. And I'm wondering if Oregon has any entities that operate outside this process of having the governor recommend how the office will be funded, and then have the legislature fund for that.
So one thing that makes Oregon somewhat unique, although I think most agents or most states have trended towards it, is, so for instance, DAS used to be straight up general fund. And they determined that being able to assess out to agencies is a way to tap into those other revenue sources like federal money coming through DHS and OHA. So agencies like DAS, the Attorney General's Office, Government Ethics, while they used to be general funded, they've turned and become other funded to go that way. All of those agencies, though, have to go through the governor's budget process and the legislative budget process. There are a few small agencies that don't have to do that. The Landscape Architect Board is something that we call semi-independent. They are able to operate outside of the governor's and legislative budget process. They can determine their own fees that they charge their customers. They are governed by their own customers, so they're getting plenty of input there. And then they do have to make a report to the legislature on their budget ultimately, but it's a report and not an ask. There are a couple of other agencies that fall into that are rather quite sizable. The lottery department is outside of the governor's budget process. And so they make a report, and I believe they make an entire presentation to the legislative body. Other agencies that you may think of as state agencies that fall outside of our purview include the university system. They do receive some general fund appropriation, but they do not go through, other than the general fund appropriation, they don't go through the governor's budget process. SAFE is completely outside of our purview, as would be OHSU.
The other one that comes up a lot is the state bar. Is another one. That's just generally. Yeah, and so in that case, like with the universities, when they moved off, they used to be part of the state budget. They moved off. They had a statutory change that made them not under the state's budget control anymore. Now there is an appropriation to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and then they make the appropriation based on a formula. So it's like the Public University Support Fund and the Community College Support Fund. So there's a few, I think it's hit and miss. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I guess, I mean, more pointedly, I'm wondering if, in some Orwellian future, if someone decided not to, that this was not a priority, this was the governor's priority to continue to fund transparency and records, if funding could be guaranteed through this process, that already exists in the state finance that would protect against something that would.
The hypothetical exists for every agency. It exists for my shop, even in the event of an economic downturn, significant economic downturn. It's the prerogative of all decision makers to shed programs. I will say I was in Kate's shoes during the 2009-11 biennium, which was the big recession biennium. I don't remember us cutting a program. We pared back a lot but I don't think that we shut down a single program.
We did not close any agencies in that time, if I remember correctly, or at least if we did, we consolidated. It wasn't pulling a whole program. One thing I would add to that is it all comes down to a revenue source. And so, like the state bar has a revenue source of attorneys that pay bar dues. And so, and SAFE has a premium that they pay, you know, so I just kind of want to make it, higher ed has a tuition. So one of the main ways one program has gone to the semi-independent or something like that is they have their own revenue stream. And I think one of the things is as long as you're kind of heavily reliant on state funds, they have to be able, the legislature tends to kind of keep that in their purview.
Yeah. And you're enabling legislation is in statute. And it's very rarely do I see statute simply repealed, especially of a significant office like this. I think watchmakers was the last one that I saw.
Would we need, this is Steve from the Oregonian, would we need additional statutory authority if we wanted to impose fees on, for example, trainings?
So Steve, I'd have to take a look at your statutes specifically to determine whether you would already have that authority or if for some reason it would fall under the authority that TAS already has. We do charge for training fees. Or we do charge training fees for some of our courses that are offered through our Chief Human Resource Office. So I would have to see what the relationship was between the two of them before I could answer that.
I was also curious, you mentioned a proposal that was rejected by legislative fiscal, I think. So can you say more about that? Which proposal is that?
So the governor put forward that while under what we call the current service level, you would follow the legislative intent to move from general fund to other fund. The governor decided, I don't want them to be other fund, I want them to be general fund. So she proposed a package to replace that and put you all under the general fund appropriation all over again. I don't remember if you also had an enhancement package that went along with that.
We asked for two additional positions.
2 additional positions, so there was another package there as well that would have enhanced that general fund even further. And the legislature did not take up either of those packages, so they died in committee, if you will. And we came back to the other funded status for the office. So while the governor had put it forward, it's the legislative prerogative to either adopt what she recommends or to reject.
So she proposed the general fund with the enhancement package for 2 additional positions. And the legislature said, no, we're going to make other funds, and we're not going to give you the enhancement.
They chose not to move forward with it, yes.
Can I add to your question earlier on the training? One of the things similar to the budget development process and the whole legislative concept process, so I do want to just say if you do need statutory change to propose the legislative concept, you have to hit certain deadlines earlier on in the biennium. So I just want to make sure as you're doing that review, that does kind of sneak up on agencies. So just kind of putting it out there, you might want to make sure we take a look at that before the end of the calendar year so that you're prepared to put a legislative concept forward, however that works. So I think you worked through legislative concept process last time, so similar, we're not intending to have it a different time period, it just does kind of sneak up on, when you're on the agency side, it sneaks up much quicker than the legislative side. I didn't mean to defray your question, no, I'm sorry. You had another one.
Just to clarify, so the budget thing is separate than a legislative concept, right? The legislative concept would be to change some other aspect of the budget, not just to increase the budget, right?
Let's take a hypothetical here, that we look back and we do need a legislative concept in order for you to charge a fee for training. Then you would need to put that legislative concept forward sooner, so probably have it prepared kind of more winter, spring of 2020, so it's prepared to be part of it. Then what you would do is part of your budget to say, hey, we want to start standing up trainings, we're going to charge a fee for it, this is how we want to spend the money. So you need to have like kind of concurrent budget package request at the same time as the ledge concept change. So you kind of work on them as the same. If there is a ledge concept that would mean your time, you're spending more money or purchasing more staff or, you know, whatever the right thing is.
And budget instructions intertwine those 2 processes so that they're complementary of each other.
I just wanted to say it to this group because it does sneak up, comes quick.
I'm wondering, are there, excuse me, are there examples maybe outside of Oregon government where there are organizations without dedicated funding, but that operate outside the legislative and, well, I guess outside the executive budget-making process?
There can be. I don't know specific ones. It would be similar. I would just go down to it. It would be similar to what the higher education example that I just had, which was the general fund is appropriated to an agency, and then the agency then distributes the funding to an entity. So it can happen. And I think it even happens in Oregon. But it does, every general fund appropriation does need to get appropriated through the legislative process. Yeah. So as long as there's a reliance on general fund.
I think like Kate said, there have been some examples, and I was trying to think, there was one that was related to costing of ballot measures or another avenue to provide input toward ballot measures. It worked kind of outside of state government and tried to get some funding funneled through government, but it fell apart very, very quickly. The legislature is very, very creative, and it's their prerogative to set up organizations the way they desire, and we would make accommodations for it. I just don't have any good concrete examples for it.
Is there a way that I or we could better advocate before the legislature in the next session for any budgetary increases that we would want?
So I think we're starting off on the right foot by including you in a monthly budget discussion within the chief operating office. Last biennium was a little weird for us. The organization of the office being somewhat part of Secretary of State and yet somewhat part of DAS was awkward. And we've not operated a program like that before. Budgetarily, you're much more centered now toward DAS, and that's a concept that we can wrap our heads around much better than we did before. So I think having those discussions, your continued participation with both Emily and myself. We've also got Dustin Ball at the the chief finance office. He is my budget analyst, so whenever I bring something forward, I have to submit it to Dustin.
So he works on my team,
yeah,
and then our team puts together the governor's budget. So that's kind of, it goes, so anything you can do to show, so successful budget packages tend to show specific results, that kind of thing. So as you're more standing at and you're more of a grounded, you have more grounding or footing underneath you as you become more mature, that's going to happen as this council gets like kind of more understanding of the processes and doing what Brian's talking about, really understanding where your budget challenges are, what is it that you want to do, having those conversations with Dustin Ball and your legislative fiscal office, as you're kind of going through it, things you're thinking about. And then that way you can have kind of more of an understanding of what kind of questions come up because every program is a little bit different. So, the more you kind of vet them and talk about them to see generally how receptive people, the policymakers are of it, the more likely you are to make a better case going throughout the whole budget process. That's what I would. And one of the things we always look at is, are you spending your current budget? And so if I add more money, it's just not being spent. And so that gets to what Brian's point of what are your budget challenges right now? What is it that you have space in, but maybe you have budget space in this particular area and you want to use it differently? How does that work? And, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So over the next couple of months, we'll talk about what are your projections for the biennium. We will assist on projecting out your salaries and wages and benefits. So that'll be out there ready to go. We'll keep in mind that salary pot will be distributed to cover any shortfalls there. What are the travel plans? What is your training plans? What do your road trips look like? And gathering additional information. If you take this body on the road, there's a cost with that. So if y'all are going to go down to Medford, there's overnight stays and mileage that have to be considered. So we cost that out for an entire biennium. And then we can also begin working with, if we add 2 additional employees, we expect to have a return of X, Y, and Z. And the earlier that we can have those conversations, not just to put them into a budget, but to really tee up the conversations with Katie, with Dustin Ball over at CFO, but then also we have to interface with the Legislative Fiscal Office as well. And I don't go buying cars just because I suddenly had an idea that I've got $1 million and I can go get 200 additional vehicles. I can't just do that. I have to prep them ahead of time, and so that he can see the workload, or he can see the equipment turnover in process. So the longer we can process those kinds of conversations, the more successful we'll be.
And you had mentioned the sort of strange place that we're positioned with the Secretary of State's office, that our administrative costs are covered by that. Do the budgetary changes, does any of this change any of that? What does that look like in the face of this?
So I think we may want to consider that, in that ultimately I have to sign off as a DAS officer on the expenditures, much like I do for all of my managers. What does the arrangement look like with Secretary of State now, and do we want to change that arrangement given the changing dynamics of the budget? So that's an open conversation.
Yeah, that would be helpful to have.
Well, I thought the authorizing statute for the PRA specifically said that it would be housed, like physically housed within Secretary of State.
Yeah, and I'm the landlord for this building. As far as I know, you all have that space. So,
Yeah.
So that will continue?
No, we're not going to change that.
Yeah, the legislation said that the Secretary of State or the State Archivist, I can't remember which it was, may provide, I think, space and administrative costs for the office. Was it the Archivist or the Secretary? Secretary of State. Yeah. In the State Archives. Yeah, that was where the Archivist came in. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the open question that I have, is how is that going to look with the budgetary shift?
Well, for us, it's one step at a time, because we're still working with a new model. Fortunately, I've been the budget officer in both agencies, so I kind of know how they both work.
And I don't think there are too many other offices that have this sort of
Oh, heavens, no.
situation. You're correct. I had another question, I can't remember what it was. I'll think on it. Anybody else has a question?
That those other organizations that are within the Chief Operating Officer's budget?
Within Chief Operating Office itself?
Yeah, like the PRA. Yeah.
So we have the court-appointed special advocate, CASA, the Office of Economic Analysis, OEA. They are the ones that provide the general fund forecast for the governor. We have the Chief Operating Office itself, which would also include, so Katie Kova's COO, it includes my position, CAO. We have some staff positions. We have our legislative liaison, our public information officer is there. We used to have IT, but we've separated them out. That might actually be it.
All I can think of off the top of my head without the budget binder right in front of me.
We'll end up with some projects that pop in and out of there as well, but they're very, very minor.
I have lots of specific questions.
Of course.
Probably better when I meet with you. I mean, I think one of our biggest challenges right now is the fact that both Todd and I spend a significant amount of time doing administrative tasks, like making the photocopies that you have here before you. And that's eating up a significant portion of time that probably would be better spent doing the sort of tasks that were envisioned for this office. So would it be helpful if for January or February, we tracked the amount of time that we're spending on administrative tasks so that we could, justify why we might need someone at least as a part-time administrative staff?
I think that would be very, very helpful. And then we can also evaluate, do I have other support staff within DAS already that can be tasked over here?
That would be helpful.
The dynamics of support staff changes from one biennium to the next. But if we find that you need dedicated staff over here, then that's certainly a package that we can entertain.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad because we spend a significant portion of our time, and Stephanie dedicates actually a lot of time to helping us prep for these meetings in particular, so.
Yep.
Do others have questions?
We're always available for questions, inside of this group, outside of this group. You can find me on the web, just look up Chief Administrative Officer, or look up the Chief Finance Office, and you'll find Kate. This is what we do.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we'll take just a 10-minute break, if that's all right with everyone. We're running a couple minutes ahead of time, so we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll be right back. Brian, I had a very specific question for you. Thank you so much. Very much. I'm going to go to the car shop. Yeah, I'm actually kind of I literally have white.
We tend to zero out.
Always a bad idea. Something always goes wrong. All right, I'll be back in a couple minutes. Thank you again so much.
The assessments on.
I'll see you around. Enjoy your summer if I don't.
Assessments on all. It looks to me like we're. The problem is, as soon as you open it, like they try to make us pay. The employment relations board, which we told them to get it back, rather than a circuit court anyway. It was pulling teeth to try and come up with a way that we could accept something on OGEC back at us.
And you said it's not working, I mean, you feel like OGEC is.
I thought I showed up and I had I don't know.
No, I think LFO was just protecting the city. OGEC isn't illegal anyway.
Yeah, right. So have you heard anything more about, 26, it's like posted 26?
We have an attorney is writing up their assessment on that bill. I know it's been challenged.
But you were talking to Nick about the bulk data and personal information aspect of it.
Yeah. I thought ONDA and SPJ all were neutral on that after the amendment.
Right. They dropped all that from, but they're still.
I will do privacy right now. Okay.
Yeah, there isn't a single.
Yeah. Well, that part, which would have created significant new liability for public employees.
Yeah, I have an amendment that would have signed in the legal liability. Which I knew wasn't going to get adopted. Rhetorical.
Right. But the whole personal information stuff got excited, but obviously they're not, they've said they're not done.
I'm sure they do. I know OEA is probably getting hit. I think they're getting hit the hardest out of the
Yeah, but I mean, the fact is that at least that Freedom Foundation hasn't gotten anywhere with trying to get this.
No, I think one of the reasons they were willing to go do the removal of part of that, particularly the stuff about trying to keep the email traffic private, was that I think we convinced them that it's never going to work because we had no interest. We weren't going to fight to go with that to protect their email traffic. We assume it's not. Right. We explained that we're the custodian of the record, and we have an absolute right in application to inspect it on request, so. Why would you talk to your attorney? You know, something we don't control.
Yeah, so there was a lot that's great about it, but it's just the whole approach of basically making public records law punitive. You know, like, they actually, I think, this is what will happen if you violate provisions of the public records law. As it stands now, the only way you violate public records law is by failing to disclose records. But to violate the law by disclosing it is,
Yeah, we didn't like that part either. Like I said, there wasn't a single word on that page, on the pages that I agree with. But after 10:45, there was no way to legislature was going to tell. No, it was not a good session for management.
That wouldn't be a minute after sending that. Don't be shy.
I actually kind of like it. It's nice to do something different. I feel like I'm always busy. Yeah. How's it going here? Good. Yeah, I was gonna say we get to do that with some people. Yeah. 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 I had a lady call me the other day, God, and try that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think she was paid all these years.
I know.
Yeah.
Just a little name tag.
You're not getting mad at anything, it's just sitting under my head.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, our neighbor here. And we have 27. Somehow, they.
Yeah, it's,
I got it for 3 o'clock.
yeah, it might be a little early, we'll see. Talk about the list and then update. Might be a little early. He's from the League of Oregon, and then the other two representatives, counties and special districts. No, they're associations.
Oh, with the.
No. Members of the OAMR do come, the Oregon Association of Municipal Workers, which features our community. They do it.
Yeah, we were.
But we don't have a member of a committee on the track, like the Sunshine Committee, we have a member of the committee. Sharon, right? Yeah.
So,
Sunshine, you're on. Would you say, I mean,
Well, so the Sunshine Committee is limited to considering the exceptions and making a recommendation on them. This is sort of a broader picture. Thank you.
So how are you folks? Good, good.
I think we've almost reached the 10 minute
The
mark.
first year we and also note that the DOJ too. Yeah, they built a little community related to the apartment complex.
We are going to chat.
That's really fascinating. Just worry about their.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so next on the agenda, we have the legislation update. We did that already. But I was wondering if folks wanted to talk about maybe potentially what we want to focus on for the next legislative session. If there are topics that we want to pursue, we can talk about it either under this agenda item, or we can talk about it under the discussion of priorities for the next biennium. Were there any lessons learned from this legislative session that folks thought that we should talk about? All right, we'll leave the discussion of priorities for later on in the agenda. So I thought that I would bring Todd up to talk a little bit about the survey. He was the one who helpfully compiled this for everyone. We do have copies of it here. Also, I had emailed a copy out to you, and I thought that we could have a little discussion about that, sort of lessons learned, and maybe potentially if folks have had a chance to look at it and have any comments, that would be helpful. Take it away, Todd.
Well, sure. So as I think I've reported in the past, the data that we received, there was quite a lot because we queried over 100 public bodies at all different levels in the state. And so while I was compiling those results, which actually came in through SurveyMonkey, emails, and email attachments into one cohesive form, I realized that if we try to give everybody just one giant Excel spreadsheet of data, this would just be lost in the noise because there's so much information. It was variably reported, like some agencies reported numbers, some agencies gave long narrative descriptions, and I just tried to create a process by which, a presentation by which is the most best way to digest the data at a quick glance. So ultimately, I broke it into 3 different Excel spreadsheets. The first of which is the most straightforward. It's non-responsive public bodies. We generally didn't get a reason from public bodies why they didn't respond. They simply just didn't answer the survey as it was sent to them. And we did send out at least 2 reminders. And so this is without judgment as to why we didn't get a response from these public bodies. We just merely have the first sheet is a list of public bodies broken down by type who did not respond to the survey. State agencies, county, city, school district, special district. And I will say overall, although I don't have the exact number in front of me, we had at least probably over 60% of all public bodies responding, with that number varying by type of public body. So for instance, state agencies that were queried had the highest response, that were around 70%, which is pretty good if you send it to a lot of agencies. So then the second sheet.
And by the way, we did, as we discussed before, we distributed it to state agencies with the help of staff. I'd specifically like to thank Liz Craig for that.
Yes, Liz particularly in data in general, were incredibly helpful in this process, and it made it a lot easier, which will lead to another point that I'll make in a moment, but I just wanted to quickly discuss the other two sheets. The second of which were kind of the numerical answers from all public bodies. In other words, the core questions of how many public records requests you get in a year and the number of processes within the time period we requested that they answer, as well as fees and fees collected. And then the third sheet was the more substantive responses, sort of more along the lines of who are you, that's filling out this survey, who typically gets public records requests at your agency, where's your public records policy located, and did you receive training in calendar year 2018 on public records and from whom? And so that's just essentially how the data itself is broken up for reading purposes. Just a few commentaries that I took away from compiling this data that I think is relevant for the PRAC to consider in intervening years if you intend to do a survey like this again, which is, I believe the initial intention was to survey all executive branch agencies as part of this group of public bodies. But in doing so, we did not actually send the inquiry to the governor's office, the Secretary of State, Department of Justice, Foley, and Treasury. And I think it's in part because that was so instrumental in helping us. When we were new at this, we kind of forgot to include these other executive branch agencies, although I will say that the governor's office and DOJ did voluntarily participate and provide their answers, so those are part of the survey as well, and we're thankful for that. Then another observation is that there were some questions about the survey questions themselves. For instance, there was some confusion between questions 5 and 6. Question 5, I believe, was how many public records requests did you complete within 15 days? And then question 6, how many were completed within 60 days? And a lot of public bodies contacted me about that to say, well, do you mean for this question 6, when I say how many were completed within 60 days, do I deduct the ones that were completed within 15 days? So should that question actually read how many were completed between 16 and 60 days, as opposed to the initial 15-day period? And so that was generally, I made the executive decision to say, yes, that was my belief in the interpretation of the PRAC as to how they wanted the question answered, but it wasn't entirely clear. That was in fact the intention. So going forward, it might be worth just thinking about that, exactly what kind of numbers we are looking for. And then question 7 about fee waivers and reductions, and how many were granted and how many were denied. Probably could have been broken out into several subsections as well that could have led to more direct answers, because there were also confusion amongst public bodies about how to answer that question. Do I say yes, no? Do I distinguish between fee waivers and denials, or fee waivers and reductions? So that just led to a lot of questions and explanations throughout the process as well. And I think most public bodies understood we were looking for them to break it up, but they weren't always entirely certain. And just finally, one other thing to keep in mind, or at least one thing I learned in compiling this data, is that by asking who are you that's completing the survey and who at your public body is your public records officer, does not automatically identify the public body in question. And so for at least 50% of your answers, I then had to Google the information that I received to figure out which public body we were actually talking about, so I can include that as a column in the sheets as well. And that's all I got.
Thank you.
Any questions I'd be happy to answer.
Did you calculate your response rate?
So I don't have it in front of me. I did at one point. Overall, I do think it was over 60%, and it varied by type of public body. So for the state, I do recall it was 70% or higher, lower for some of the other public bodies.
We can send those numbers around if you think it would be helpful.
I can find that.
Yeah, I guess related to that, for the local government, as I understand, you had how many were chosen, or was it all school districts in all counties?
No, so ultimately the decision was the 10 most populous cities, 10 randomly selected cities, and then 10 randomly selected counties, school districts, and special districts.
So half the counties. Pretty striking.
And I did, even though it was somewhat random, I did try to do a pretty fair geographic distribution. So in trying to choose the recipients, I would kind of looked at the state of grids, and within that grid, selected random recipients of the survey within those geographic sections and tried to spread it around as much as possible.
I had one request. I hope this isn't too onerous, but I think it'd be really interesting to be able to see, let's say, the top 10 for total volume of requests received, and the top 10 for the dollar amounts collected.
Yeah, I think we could probably put those numbers together. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do maybe some kind of report just from the advocate's office on the survey results and sort of trends that we saw. But I think that those are particularly relevant data points to look at in that report. Are there other data points that people would be particularly interested in?
I don't know if this is a data point, but I thought it was really interesting actually that some of the agencies that are dealing with the highest volumes of record requests were not the agencies that I would have expected. And this may have to do with the type of records that are requested from the different agencies, but I just feel like the ones that are most local in terms of, you know, the volume of requests and so forth were not actually the ones dealing with most requests. And I thought it was very interesting. DEQ was top of the list, and Department of Corrections. Just like here we have a couple of examples of state agencies that are doing this and doing it rather briskly without a whole lot of fallout, and I'd be really interested in why that. So is it just that they're, you know, doing really just one-off simple documents, or these complex requests, and how are they managing them in such a way that they're not complaining about managing?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So one of the things, I'm on the federal corollary of this kind of council, the FOIA Advisory Committee on the federal level. And one of the things that I did while I was on that committee last term was we went and we looked at agencies, we looked at their statistics, looked at which agencies were processing the largest number of public records requests and seemed to be doing it most efficiently. And then we would have conversations with them about their processes, how they're managing that, what kinds of requests are they receiving, to just sort of get more information on maybe best practices that we could recommend. Do you think that it would be helpful to maybe do some follow-up with some of those higher performing agencies?
I do.
Okay. I mean, it's possible that, I don't know how much time they have, but we could potentially see if we could get some of them to show up at a council meeting and just talk to us a little bit about their processes and how they're managing that. I think that would be useful. I could put out some invitations.
I think that would be really good, and
Okay.
maybe even you can make a video of that and take that on the road for
Yeah.
training.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we could do as a council that would be helpful is maybe create some recommendations for best practices, and looking to those agencies that are doing a good job, that are processing a large volume of requests, might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I would echo, I think we've had very good experience with DEQ on getting records. And really noteworthy given the 4,000 requests that they process each year.
Yeah, and Lee, I think you mentioned, did you mention Department of Corrections was one of the ones that you would flag?
Yeah, it just kind of popped out for me. It was a pretty high volume. I think they did approximately 2,000 requests, and all of them were processed. So it's quite a lot. So
okay, yeah.
I'm curious about how that came about.
I suspected they would be very happy to come and talk to us. We have really good ties with them. So I think they would be happy to come and talk to us. And I will also say, like, we went and we toured one of the prisons recently, and they were just showing us, you know, all the places where records are within the prison. I mean, I think as an agency, they're also one of the agencies that's facing some of the biggest challenges in being able to provide those records. So it would be really great to hear from them.
Yeah, I noticed that their fees were the highest, or not the highest, some of the highest. I think it was the medical board had the highest fees. Yeah, more information was like, okay, that sort of makes sense. They're doing these really high volumes of requests, but how does that shake out exactly?
Yeah, I suspect for Department of Corrections that and this is just my suspicion, the reason that their fees are high is most of their requests are not from members of the news media who would necessarily qualify as public interest requesters. It's mostly Department of Corrections inmates who have more of a private interest in the document, so they're not qualifying as much for a fee waiver. But I would have to ask them to confirm that. Okay, So we can identify maybe over the next couple of months, Todd and I can take a look at these numbers and see what we think might be interesting agencies to speak to in future meetings. Have folks had much of a chance to review the survey? Do we want to talk about it more once you've had more time to review it? What do you think would be helpful?
I briefly glanced at it. I go, fee waivers, I think are important for me to see when I was quarterback in the day. I was always just kind of always trying to figure out how agencies figure out fee waivers.
Yeah.
I remember, I think the Portland Police Bureau had like 12 given over, 4,000, and then I've seen some others that give a lot more.
So we're hoping to release this data, probably just posting it up on the website, maybe sending out a tweet and letting people know about it in the next day or two. Do folks have any recommendations for that or thoughts on that? Yeah, have a list.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I think I'm going to need some time because I'm finding some of the narratives really interesting. A couple of the agencies. So, occupational therapy licensing board, they listed 38 requests, but they only listed license mailing lists. So I'm assuming those were commercial people with commercial interests. So they don't have, nobody's requested that. They didn't document request for such a large group of professionals is interesting to me. Then ODF&W had a fairly detailed explanation for their each break down their narrative. So I think posting is great. I'm going to want to be able to digest some of this narrative information. I think there's some mining.
Yeah, so maybe we'll flag it as an agenda item for the next meeting so we can talk about it. If people want to take some time in the meantime to review it, look at what you think are the interesting trends that maybe might bear further investigation or, further comment or clarifying questions or something else, some follow-up, we can do that at the next meeting if folks are amenable to that. I will flag that for next meeting. And then my next question is, how often do we think it would be useful to conduct a survey similar to this? Do we want to do it on an annual basis, every other year basis? I mean, I think it would be interesting to see the change in numbers over time, but it's sort of up to the council as a whole what you think would be useful as far as the survey goes. Do we want to aim to do this again next year?
Initially, I think repeating it certainly, has value. And the thing that there's so much great information here. It's super helpful, but the fact that a rough 40% of agencies did not respond is kind of a red flag. That's, more than a third. It seems like it should be repeated until people can get a grip on. That just tells me that the agencies don't know and they don't have an easy method for tracking. I don't know if that's true, but my suspicion would be that the agencies that responded would be the ones that could do so most quickly and efficiently. So repeating it, with frequency until the agencies are able to even answer these questions, I think would have value.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Do others have thoughts on this?
I agree.
With probably the tweaks that Todd had mentioned in our lessons learned. Question number 1, what public body do you work for?
That would help. Like you said, another observation that Ginger and I were discussing is that of the agencies that answered no, they had not received training in the last year. That's something that Ginger would consider targeting them with training, and in part training around how to collect their data and provide answers to a survey like this, or just simply complying with the 2017 changes to the law should lead to the output that they have this information available. So that might be one way to use the survey to find other training opportunities. that could in turn increase agency's ability to respond to a future survey.
Yeah. And I had also thought I want to take some time to look through this and identify which agencies didn't have publicly posted public records policies and try to work with them to create a public records policy. And for the ones that do have public records policies, I think it would be great to be able to link to those on our website, have some central repository of those. Not that those links won't necessarily change and we'll have to update them, but that it would be helpful just as a starting point to have that in a central location.
So what would be the timing, when would you send these out?
So let's see, this year we sent it out in February? January or February?
Yeah.
So it would be next January or February.
We had about a 2-month turnaround.
Yeah, we gave them some time.
And then
Because I think at our meeting in December, we talked about finalizing the questions, and then we sent it out in January, and we gave them until maybe mid-February to respond.
Yeah, and if you asked for more time, which obviously wasn't an issue,
Yeah.
took more time to respond, we ultimately did.
Great. I'm wondering whether, I think we deliberately tried to limit the number of questions this time around to increase the response rate, and I wonder whether we could get away with maybe adding one question next time around, but we laid down a base.
Yeah, I think one question would probably be reasonable.
Well, and so I just want to chime in with some of the responses where they said they hadn't had training. I kind of recognize a lot of the names of the agencies and know that many of them have had training. Maybe the person that answered it didn't know that they've had training, like recently. Also, the non-responsive public bodies list, I can kind of look through here and see, you know, which one of these maybe it would have been better to send it directly to their records officer instead of, I think the way that Liz was able to distribute it was through the directors. And I think last meeting we had Housing and Community Services chime in and say, hey, if you want this to get done, you should send it to the records officers. And I have that information. I know who those people are, so it might be worthwhile to send it to both the director through Liz, see if we can get a response that way. And if we don't, we can send it directly to the records officers. And I think, you know, just quickly glancing, I kind of know who they are, so I can send them directly, send them the link to the survey.
Yeah, that would be great.
We can kind of coordinate that a little better.
Yeah, and some of this is a timing and resource issue too, because certainly for a lot of the public bodies, one, I didn't want to be presumptuous to send it to anyone other than leadership, but two, just because I was primarily doing this on my own, it was hard to call like every single public body and say, who's the person at your agency who can actually receive this?
Yeah.
And Liz can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she did ultimately send it to the communications people on the state level too.
Okay.
Or at least maybe a reminder went to them as well.
Yeah, and communications people sometimes are the records officer, but not that often, at least with state agencies, maybe with local government, they might be the same.
And this is Liz. That is what happened. We did send it to agency heads, and then we followed up by sending it also to the communications directors. But Stephanie's right. Not all of the comms people are the ones who are responding to public records requests. So if we added in Stephanie's contacts, I think, and we used those 3 lists, then we would cover a lot of our bases. And then I had a question. I'm not sure if I heard correctly. So did you say that the response rate?
I don't think that, I don't.
The agencies.
I know I have it, and I can distribute it. I can distribute it to everyone on the council. We had talked about that. I don't know that I sent it out. I don't know that I sent it out with the survey, but Todd did send that to me, and I can pass it along.
I just wasn't clear if you said that the response rate was that 40% of state agencies didn't respond, or 40% of the entire public bodies list didn't respond.
Yeah, Liz, I'm doing this from memory, but overall we had approximately somewhat over a 60% response rate for all public bodies, but state agencies actually did best with something like 70%.
Yeah, I think it was like 70 or 73% of state agencies responded.
Just looking at Oregon State Police, 4,700 records requests received, 4,000 of which processed.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify.
Okay. Sorry, Steve, you were saying?
Well, Oregon State Police, apparently 4,000 out of 4,700 requests were completed outside the time required under the deadline bill.
Yeah.
I guess that was going to be one of my questions. So have you given some thought on like how you, once you do the trends and analysis, like what's the overall purpose for this? How are you doing that?
I mean, I think that kind of depends on you all and what you think would be helpful. You know, we can draft up a report just talking about the trends and analysis. We can, as a council, make recommendations based on this survey. It's sort of up to the council what direction it would like to take on this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be great to identify, obviously, I think you, like you said, identify areas for training. I think I mentioned last time, for me, training is a really big important part for this record, at least for me, while I'm here. So if it can be used as a tool to identify not only training, but like how the public can ask when a fee waiver is applicable, all that kind of stuff, and which agency needs better understanding and training on that.
Yeah. So it sounds like first action item for this is I'm hoping to go through it in the next month or two and identify public bodies that said that they hadn't had training, to reach out to them proactively and to offer that training. Also looking through it for which public bodies don't necessarily have a public records policy that's posted, working with them to perhaps draft a public records policy for the ones that are posted, finding a way to sort of put a central repository of those links on our website. I think is a good next step. As far as specific takeaways from the report, it sounds like folks need a little bit more time to digest it, and maybe we can talk about this and revisit it at the next council meeting. And then from there, once you all have identified things that you think are interesting in this, perhaps we can discuss whether or not we think it would be useful to issue some kind of formal report analyzing this data, and if you think useful, then make recommendations. Does that sound good? It also sounds like we, for the most part, think that it would be useful for this to be a survey that we conduct for now on an annual basis. All right, do we want to take a vote on the conducting the survey again next winter/spring? Is that something we think would require a vote?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. I didn't hear any folks on the phone. Folks on the phone, are you still there?
Yes,
Anybody opposed?
Sharon.
Okay, great. Is anyone on the phone opposed to the idea of conducting the survey on an annual basis for the time being?
I'm good.
Silence is assent. Do folks on the phone have any comments on any of this? I don't want you to feel abandoned out there in phone land. All right.
I don't want to speak for Liz necessarily, but Liz and I worked together about, a month and a half ago to review 74, I think, public records management policies that were submitted by state agencies. We only had one non-responsive state agency. They all submitted them, and this isn't necessarily the public records request policy. Some of them submitted both. But in terms of public records management policies, I did personally review them all, and Liz and I reached out to each and every one of them, letting them know what corrections needed to be made in order to get an approval. And so that work has been done. So 74 out of 75 submitted a policy and were approved conditionally. So that's an update that has happened since the last time they held them. But that's just state agencies, not local government. So
was that the public records processing piece or just like record retention?
it was
I think, mostly focused on public records management piece, but many of them have combined those policies. Liz, I don't know if you want to chime in on that part of it.
Yeah, this was sorry, let me start over. DAS implemented a statewide policy on records management in 2016, and that was because that was one of the recommendations from the Secretary of State's audit, and it was part of the governor's executive order. Well, since 2016, as we all know, there were changes to the public records law, and so we needed to update the statewide policy, and then that trickled down to state agencies needing to update their internal policies. The records management policy covers everything from retention to training to, what do you do with text messages to access as well. So one of the pieces that we needed to update in the records management policy was the section on public records requests, which is pretty small, but it needed to be updated to reflect the new statutory timelines that we need to meet. So that's been done, and Stephanie really helped in getting all of that completed within the timeline that we had. So thank you for that.
Great. Whether they post them on their website, I'm not sure.
Sorry, this is Catherine Holmes with the State CIO's office. Just as a note, there is a mandate that all agencies provide a link to their public records policy on the Oregon Transparency website. So that might be at least a good starting point. I see no reason why they can't live in two spots, but they're already required to provide that link if they have one.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's for state agency, right?
Correct.
So we will revisit the question of the substance of the survey in the next meeting. We'll set aside some time for that on the agenda. For now, does anyone else have any thoughts or comments on this? Okay, great. If folks want to think about for the next meeting, what additional question you think would be useful to add to the survey next time around per Steve's comment, that would be helpful. All right, so next item on the agenda. Next up, we have a discussion of the priorities for the next biennium and a creation of subcommittees. I know we have at least one member of the public who wanted to comment on the public records related issues. If you wanted to talk, if others in the back want to comment, that would definitely be helpful.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Susan Hanson. I have a small environmental nonprofit in the rural Clackamas County area. I've worked since 2007 on land use and environmental issues, and I started getting concerned about transparency. Back then, I participated in former AG Kroger's initial outreach in 2008 when he went around the state and heard from citizens about our problems with public information. I'm sorry to say I don't see that much has changed since then. I do believe that having Ginger and Todd as advocates, lawyers who can actually advocate and answer legal questions is one big step in the right direction. But in all the years, and I do heavy information to state agencies, especially, and then the city of Molalla and some other Clackamas County, I think the reforms that are needed are to have clear reasons for citizens for denial of fee reductions or waivers. Molalla actually produced for a little bit of time recently a records request form that said it would not honor any fee waiver request. Ginger helped reform that, and they dimmed it down briefly to that they would probably not do anything. And then I complained about that, and I noticed, I looked today, and that is all gone. I don't know, I mentioned that to Todd. I don't know if anything got said or if they just finally got the legal thing. But anyway, I think there needs to be an idea of what reasonable and customary fees for documents and time might be. I've got piles of stuff to share with you where punitive fees were produced by the city of Molalla to stop the transmission of documents they didn't want us to see. I've got a big pile of things here going back and forth about a biosolids removal issue. I mean, in disclosure, my group that sued the city of Malala under the Clean Water Act, we had a consent decree. Malala was trying to hide that they hadn't conformed to the consent decree. And I rephrased these requests several different ways, and I got, you know, separated out year by year and this and that. And the time needed to fulfill the request and the money that they wanted to charge, like $151 for one biosolids removal receipt in that same calendar year, $151. And there's an excuse in a place like Malala, and I imagine other little cities, that they don't keep good records, but that's not the public's fault. The cities and the agencies need to keep good records and have them readily available, and if they can't come up with that, well, then if they have to go on a 6 or 8 or 10 hour search, sorry, but that's not my problem. And we found that out asking for what should it be, a permanent record, an annexation record that was only maybe 5 years past, that's a permanent record. And I got a thing back from Malala saying, oh, well, give us something like 250 or 500. I mean, it was just outrageous. And they started a search, and maybe they find it, maybe they wouldn't, but it could cost a whole lot more than that. Of course, we don't go through with these things. So finally, I get things by dimming it down to what I know they don't have. And even that took over a month, and the Clackamas County District Attorney had to get involved to get Malala to admit that they didn't have an aeration cleaning basin documents, blah, blah, blah. So that is going on big time in the game playing with records requests, and it's just wrong. I don't do requests anymore for Malala because I know what will blow back. It's just ridiculous. So we've got to stop that. There needs to be strict deadlines for responding. We need to have details of what they're trying to charge for, you know, the time to cost records and the cost of staff time, blah, 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 because like I said, they were all over the map with what that was costing. The other thing I just learned too with Clackamas County is I was able to go in to their planning department and read paper files for free. I'd say, show me a code enforcement file or show me a planning file. They give you a little boost and there's the file and you read it for free if you're going to go to the office. I had done that for a while, and I just asked to see a code compliance file they had, and I got the blowback that now everything is on electronic file, and that I would have to pay $70 for them to copy one file because there's no way to view it in the office. And I have complained to the Board of County Commissioners about that. But this electronic file issue, I don't see why any agency couldn't have one devoted computer screen that they can shoot the electronic file onto if a person's willing to go to their office. But I also find it absurd that they can't transfer the file directly to the people because you know they're sharing it around in their office. So that is really bad. You talked about training, and I think you need to train the district attorneys because that's who we are supposed to appeal to if the cities don't comply. And I found that that's kind of spotty depending on if the district attorney has been familiar with the issues that go on with public information requests. And maybe think of outreach and listening sessions around the state, like Kroger did in the past. It sounds like you might be doing that, but I mean, I think hearing from citizens might help sway the governor or the legislature to give you, you know, the support you need to go on with these reforms. You talked about DEQ, and I want to say that they are sterling. They are meeting their 15-day working day request. Since 2013, I cannot tell you how many zillions of information requests we've done to them. They put us in a room for 2 different 4 or 5 hour sessions, let us talk through all the old files, and then I do ongoing requests. They have a form that asks why you are worthy of a fee waiver, and you fill it out, and they completely have given us fee waivers ever since. We've never had to pay a cent to DEQ, and I cannot tell you, they send draft documents, they send email chains, they send draft blah, 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 whatever, but DEQ should be the example of how everybody should be doing business. They are just phenomenal. ODOT, not so much. They were friendly, and we give you some information, and then when it started to get, maybe it was going to be a problem, they started to charge the huge fees. So I think the fee waiver thing, and if a group gets a fee waiver on the basis of the work they're doing from one agency like DEQ, kind of hard to imagine how legally someplace like Malala, you should be giving the same information because we're doing the same outreach. I mean, we do speeches, we go to various state agencies and talk to boards, we do letters to the editor. I mean, we are spreading the information like there's no tomorrow, and we get, like I said, denied by Malala. So that stuff really needs to stop. Yeah, the arbitrary fees, just the terrible on the electronic files. And that's about what I have, but I did want to share some, I'll just leave these with you, but there's trails and trails of, you know, requests for information and the various charges Malala came up with. There's a little discussion with the Clackamas County planner about this new $70 fee to look at one file, and various other trails with Malala. And I just really salute you all for working on this. I hope you can get more people involved, because to me, people, you know, I hear all this feedback about we don't trust government. Well, a lot of people don't trust government because they don't get the strict information from government. People in Malala will just listen to what Malala has to say. They think, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with our wastewater plant, let us worry. And, you know, we've been able to use DEQ information to get people to understand what's really going on. And I think if more people can understand they have the right to this information, that they could see what was going on, they might trust government more. So that's what it boils down to for me. But please, there's just got to be a more universal way that everybody looks at public information and the charges and fee waivers and the whole thing. It's just all over the map what people want to charge and how they treat requesters like my group. So, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Yeah, I will get this to you.
I did want to follow up on something related to that I was thinking of as Susan was talking. We had spoken last year about the DAS fee policy, which would standardize fees for state agencies. Liz, I was wondering, and I hate to put you on the spot, but I was wondering what the status of that was, if you're still there on the line.
Yeah, I am. The status is, I think we're kind of on hold. When the PRAC had last discussed the draft fee schedule, there were recommendations that the council made that, let me think, I'm trying to think back because it's been a while. I had incorporated in those edits, and then I think we put things on hold because there was a conversation during session about, or there was a bill during session that would have put fees into statute. And so we were kind of waiting to see what happened with the legislative process. So now that that is not in play anymore, I think that we probably do need to revisit that issue at an upcoming meeting.
Great. Yeah, I think I would definitely be happy to help with that, and I assume the council would be happy to participate as well.
Okay.
I think that at least for state agencies would help with some of the issues that Susan was talking about. Of course, it might not necessarily standardize things on the local level, but I think it would be helpful to at least create some more standard expectations.
Right, exactly.
Oh, and I also did want to give one more update because folks had expressed interest in it in our last meeting. The bill, the so-called penalties bill, did in fact pass the legislature. It's something that we're updating our trainings with now, but I wanted to just let folks know that because they had asked about it last time. This is the bill that was proposed by Representative Power along with the Society of Professional Journalists and some of the other advocates. And it would allow district attorneys or the Attorney General to potentially impose up to $200 in fees for undue delay.
And fee waiver.
Yeah.
There was some legislative record on that bill from Senator, and a colloquy between Senators Hansel and Dembro on the floor, and I would appreciate if the training materials reflect that record.
Okay, great. Yeah, what was it, just briefly, what was it?
I can send you I wrote the questions in the colloquy, so I can give them to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
The egregiousness and some examples of what would not be egregious conduct based on the hearing in the Senate.
Yeah, so that's something we will be updating our trainings in light of, and hopefully in the future, Liz, if you like our assistance, we're happy to participate in conversations about that P policy.
Yeah, Ginger, let me follow up with you after this meeting and before our next meeting.
Sounds good. So at this point, I think this is probably the real meat of this meeting. The council is now a permanent body. We don't have to worry about the sunset provision. So my question for you is, what do we want to focus on going forward? And I would like us to form 3 subcommittees, but I would like for you, of course, to pick the topics of those subcommittees. I think having subcommittees would help us to move things along in a faster and more efficient way. I've seen the success of subcommittees on both the FOIA Advisory Committee that I work on the federal level, as well as in the Sunshine Committee here in the state of Oregon. So I think that that's something that we should do moving forward. I think 3 is a good number, and folks can volunteer themselves to be on whatever subcommittee is of particular interest to them. But I think that it would allow for more meaningful engagement and a more efficient process. But it's really kind of up to you all what you think are the areas that we should focus on. I mean, obviously, I think one of the most useful conversations we can have is a conversation about fees, because that's something that I hear about so frequently in requests for assistance. And because the reasonableness of fees, as Susan was talking about, I mean, that's not something that people can necessarily appeal to a district attorney or the attorney general. So I think that that's a useful potential subcommittee. But I would like to, kick it to you to discuss what it is you think would be helpful.
Well, I would definitely, that would be absolutely my first priority, would be the fee discussion, because I think as you pointed out, it's would seem anyway that it's often done to dissuade requesters, and does not bear any reflection of reality when it comes to cost. And I think Representative Power had a very strong proposal. I think it had potential for a lot of widespread support, and I think that proposal could be part of the discussion. Something that matched the FOIA approach to fee waivers could also be part of the discussion, but I would be eager to pursue that further. I think another area that we haven't talked about, it came up today with the issue of budget. I think we're still, as a council, still in the process of institution building and trying to make this a sustainable, make your office sustainable and make the council sustainable over time. And I think budget is really essential to that. And I think figuring out how to ensure the council's independence and the public records advocate's independence is really important. And obviously there has to be oversight by the public bodies when it comes to budgeting. But I think it does pose a risk when your job, when the advocate's job is to advocate for the public. I mean, like any ombudsman who interfaces with the public, the long-term care ombudsman or various agency ombudsmen or inspectors general at the federal level, they're going to be at odds with their executive agencies at times. And I think there needs to be some way, just imagining the potential for political machinations down the road is something that we need to at least explore. I think it's, and simply from the standpoint of having an ongoing budget to sustain the office, I think it's really important. So I would support that potentially as an additional subcommittee topic.
Great, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I would certainly echo the need for a conversation about fees. I think that everything that Susan just touched on is, it outlines really clearly some of the the long-standing issues, the reasonableness of some of them, the reasons for the denied records, I think kind of falls into that discussion about obstruction, actually cost breakdowns, and the application of fee waivers, all super important and long overdue. I would say also, I know that there are other discussions about data going on with other public bodies, but I think it's important for the PRAC to remain involved in that conversation. I would set that probably as a pretty high priority, if only just to have some cohesion between this body and the Sunshine Committee and make sure that there's some continuity in how those issues are being pursued. And I don't know if that maybe, I don't think it falls under the fee thing, although, the arbitrariness of fees for electronic files is certainly a part of that problem. I would echo Steve's concern as well about, maybe the need to have a conversation about whether this body is independent, can operate independently. It's worth discussion. I would probably put fees in that as my top two.
So on the Sunshine Committee issue, I know they are looking at data. Todd and I do participate with the Sunshine Committee to the extent possible. I had approached Michael Crone about the possibility of creating a seat for the public records advocate on that committee, and he is amenable to that idea, so maybe that's something that potentially we'll be able to get in the next legislative session, because it is a little difficult to participate in a meaningful way when you don't actually have a seat at the table. So that, I think, is something that I'm hoping to aim for the next legislative session. But yeah, we have been engaging with the committee to the full extent possible.
And I think that's great, and I'm not super clear on whether we're ever going to see the Sunshine Committee flow legislation. I think that we have that power here, and more flexibility to do it, which is why I think maybe if the PRAC had a separate data committee, it might be a wise thing.
Yeah, and it could be, the Sunshine Committee is limited to considering issues related to exemptions, and I think there might be broader issues related to data that perhaps we could look at. So that may be a good idea.
I would echo the concern for a recommendation. We have a data subcommittee. I think we in the league have been spending a lot of time and resources on that. It's a great tool. I think how we make that more accessible around the state is important.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Do others have thoughts?
We talked last month about some ideas. I can't remember exactly what they were, but I remember fees and then mentioning that I was interested in the tree. But
yeah,
hearing everyone else, ideally I'd love to make sure that the public is very aware of the work that you're doing to learn more, but I feel like if you're spending a lot of time even like doing, administrative stuff, I think for me, like working to make sure your budget's tight and independent, confident that we can continue on for many years would be a big priority. Fees is great, and then also, Susan, also the strict deadlines to reply, that was also an issue for me, like figuring out if there's a way to narrow down better language on how long it takes for an agency to respond to public records, or if there's something more specific that could be consistent. But I don't know if that's worthy of its own separate committee.
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue, and it's a large part of what I hear complaints about. I'm kind of curious. I might want to wait and see on that to see what happens with this new piece of legislation and what the actual effects are on that. Like if it does have a measurable effect on, delay and government bodies timely responding to public records requests.
What is the authority of your office to levy fines or fees?
I can't. No. My only authority is to find a public body or potentially a requester acting in bad faith, but that doesn't have fees or fines associated with it other than potentially attorney's fees up to that point. But, I mean, by the time that someone comes to my office, usually they aren't incurring attorney's fees. So I'm not really in a position to levy fines. In the way that the statute that created this office, it's not so much meant to be an enforcement office. So, which has its pluses and minuses.
Have you found anybody in bad faith?
I have found one person in bad faith. Unexpectedly, it was on the requester side. A gentleman who is well known to many here in state government for making threats against people in state government, who wanted me to mediate for him.
Can we guess that name?
I bet you could guess that name.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he would be known to you. He wanted me to mediate for him with an agency that he had been harassing. He forwarded an email to me where he had called a Department of Transportation official a whore to her. And I said that I would not be offering him mediation services because there are a number of agencies that have, no telephonic contact policies with him. So, and he did get arrested at an event of mine, not having anything to do with me. But he was the only one I found acting in bad faith because I don't see any point in investing the office's resources in a mediation for a person who refuses to act respectfully. So.
I feel bad that you and the agency were subjected to it, but it doesn't, not even remotely surprising to me that we would have that situation with some of the things our members have been subjected to.
Yeah, and I suspect that it's the same core of individuals who are frequently subjecting government officials to slurs and harassment. So, but that was the only instance in which I've had to find that.
We get a lot of, for some of our officials, they get a lot of racial data.
So it sounds like, as far as interest for subcommittees, there's a lot of interest in fees, potentially a subcommittee centered around the issues of independence vis-a-vis the budget and other areas, and then a subcommittee that's focused on questions related to data. Folks have other thoughts, comments? Very quiet group today. I provided you guys with coffee. I was hoping it would pep things up.
Some of us are still in our post-session so.
Okay, so do we want to go ahead and take a vote for the creation of those 3 subcommittees?
Can we also have like the independence one, also have like a submission for public fees?
For what?
Public, like just have a submit, a secondary eye towards public,
Like engagement?
Yeah, engagement.
Yeah, that could be its own subcommittee, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a big deal, it's just something that
I would like to work with you on that specifically, if it's something that you're interested in, because that is, I mean, I feel like I've done a good job engaging with members of the media. Like, I feel like I know most of the newspapers around the state, like I've met with many of their staff, like I understand what their concerns are broadly of that constituency, but outreach to the public, that's a little bit more difficult, and like actually finding the people where they are. So that's something that I could really use some feedback on. I don't know if folks think that would be useful for a subcommittee, or if that's just something that potentially, if you could help me with that, I would really appreciate it.
I think it's very useful. Outreach is very useful.
Again, hearing Susan, and there's nonprofit groups that are like utilizing beyond just the media that are heavily relying on it, and I think, whether it's social media or postcard mailers or whatnot,
Maybe we could reframe, this subcommittee not as the independent subcommittee, but as maybe the sustainability subcommittee.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Which might also encompass outreach, marketing, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I like that. Okay, so seems like we have coalesced around 3 subcommittees. fees, sustainability, which includes outreach, questions of budget, independence, all of that, and then data. All right, do we want to take a vote on that?
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Folks on the phone?
Aye.
All right, all,
No,
Aye.
I can do a vote explanation if you like.
Yeah, please.
I think it's unlikely that the league would get to a place where we would agree to a legislative mandate on local government fees, just from the home rule issue.
okay.
And this is Rob. I'm in the same place as Scott.
Okay.
Well, does that mean you won't participate in the discussion?
Oh, no, I want to participate in the discussion.
So Rob will be on the subcommittee.
I think as far as the subcommittee goes, I mean, we're not necessarily expecting that the outcome would be a legislative mandate. I mean, there are any range of potential outcomes that could come from that subcommittee.
Yeah, and I would note that Representative Powers' bill did not cover local governments.
Which bill? She had several.
The fee reduction bill.
I thought it was,
I'm pretty sure it was state only.
Yeah, I think
I
that
had one conversation with her about it early, in February.
I think you might be right that it might have been only a state agency. So let's go back to the question of the subcommittee. So is it a nay to the creation of a subcommittee on the topic of fees?
No, I will change my 2 and I vote on the subcommittee to creation of a subcommittee to talk fees. I just qualified that we would agree, we would probably fight tooth and nail any legislative mandate in this matter.
Which is why I think it would be particularly useful to have you participate in that subcommittee.
Rob seems like he really wants to talk about it.
Rob, are you a nay on the idea of the creation of the subcommittee, or is it just on the issue of it resulting in legislation?
It's the latter. I'm in the same place that Scott's in. I don't mind a subcommittee. Let's talk about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think more conversation is better. All right, so we have our 3 subcommittees. How do folks want to arrange the volunteering to be on a subcommittee situation? Would you like to volunteer here and now? Would you like to think about it and email me later? Perhaps a combination of both.
I think it'd be useful to get actually come to think of it, half of us aren't here right now, right? So.
Yeah, we're missing several people.
Are we looking for each person to pick one?
Nope, you can be on as many subcommittees as you would like to volunteer for.
I think it would be good to somehow ensure some minimum representation of, maybe local government and news media and whatever,
Yeah, so the way that we did it on the FOIA Advisory Committee on the federal level was each subcommittee had to have at least one representative of the requester community, one representative of the government community. So I think that would be a good way to do it here. And in fact, there were chairs of each subcommittee, and I think that's also a good model here. So I think that we should have a chair from each side, from the requester side and from the government side for each of these subcommittees. So we're missing some folks right now, and I do want to give them an opportunity to volunteer. So is that something that we can do over email, or is that problematic?
I have a feeling the next question about that. Would that count as volunteering for subcommittees? Would that count as deliberation?
I don't think so, no.
But if we simply directed that we would like to, everybody gave you their priorities for subcommittees, set them directly to you as opposed to the rest of the committee.
Yeah, that would be great.
We would not run afoul of any serial or email meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. If folks want to volunteer, send me an email, volunteer for subcommittee. If you are interested in being a chair, please include that in your email. And we should have one chair from each requester and government side.
Each subcommittee will sort of decide on its own the frequency of meetings and date, start date, and all that kind of thing?
I think so. On the Federal Advisory Committee, that's the way that we did it. We kind of left it to the chairs to be the authority on the way that they wanted to kind of carry things out and what goals they wanted to set for themselves. I think that that would be helpful here. With the expectation, I will be, I guess, participate in all of the meetings if possible, because I'd like to kind of keep track of where things are at so I can keep moving things forward with the council in general, if that is amenable to all of you. Okay. All right. So, action items for everyone on the council is to think about those subcommittees and which ones are of most interest to you. You can volunteer for all 3 subcommittees if you are feeling excited. But please do volunteer for at least one. If you're interested in being a chair, please note that in your email to me. I'll compile a list and I'll send it out to you all. And then the subcommittees can sort of go ahead and move forward with their conversations about how frequently they'd like to meet and what goals they'd like to set for themselves. And I will also take a close look at the public meetings law and try to make sure that we stay within that as well. So I'll come up with some instructions for that.
And the subcommittees are public meetings?
Yes. Yeah, that would be a public meeting.
Your discussion of when to meet would also be public.
How's that work?
It doesn't. You need to, at least, you need to assign them when to meet first.
Okay.
To have an organizing meeting.
Because they can have an organizing meeting so that they can determine how often to meet.
Okay.
You can't, by email, decide how often to meet, because that's serial.
So we can send you our choice of committee numbers or whatever we want to be on, and then some dates that might work for us for our first meeting.
And then I can set the first meeting, and from there you all can discuss at that meeting how often you would like to meet.
We have a subcommittee about changing the serial meeting law, so we
That would be nice.
Can I throw something out there about, since you brought up public meetings? I just got an email from Noah at DOJ that the new public records and meetings manual is online as of today. Yay!
I'm very excited. That is something to share about that, and I send a follow-up email out to a whole bunch of people who have inquired in the last month about that situation.
I sent you the link, so.
I'm excited about this.
Yeah, we can send the link.
And now they'll have to update it again with the information about the new penalties bill.
I think, is it in there?
I doubt it. They update it every 2. They didn't update it last time, but they update it every 2 years anyways with the new legislation. It's usually published every even number of years, or it has been in the past.
Yeah, they missed it.
It's
been 5 years.
Better late than never.
Yes, and I'm very excited about this.
You don't have to pay for it anymore.
No, that's true.
Thank you, guys from U of L.
Yeah. So, excellent news. All right. So is there any other council business that anyone has to discuss? Okay. All right. So moving forward, again, send me your interest in the subcommittees. If you want to be a chair, send me that. Send me your date availability, and I will select some dates for the subcommittees to do their first meeting, at which you can discuss how many meetings you would like to have in the future in the context of a public meeting. Just meetings all the way down. And take a look at the survey data. We have it printed out here. I think it's a little easier to navigate in the electronic format, which brings me actually to my final question. We spend a lot of time making photocopies, and many trees were killed in order for this meeting to take place. Do people think it's useful to continue to have paper copies of things, or would you like to move it over to purely, would you like to submit to electronic billing type question? Do we need to have paper copies for the purposes of the public meetings law? Oh, okay, great. Maybe we can save some trees, if people are okay with that.
I mean, maybe a half dozen for members of the public to attend.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we will lessen our number of photocopies in the future. Todd and I thank you for that. The trees, thank you for that. All right, great. So good work. Congratulations again on being a permanent public body. And thank you all for all of the work that you do. So, to adjourn. Wait, sorry. I'm proposing that we meet again in late September. Is that all right with folks?
If we do earlier October, late September is our conference week.
Okay. So let's do maybe the first week of October.
I think you're invited to that too.
I am. I'll have to go with my calendar. I didn't have it in my calendar, but I'll follow up with you. All right, so first week of October? All right. Okay, thank you all very much. And now, move to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, all in, do we have to take a vote on that? Is that a thing that requires? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone who wants to continue to sit here? All right, all opposed? Okay.